there's two sheets.
For like a fall.
That's two sheets. Nice sentiment. Thank you.
You were half in favor.
And then I get out.
Right.
Yeah.
Surya.
Is it just one or two?
Yeah,
Two sheets?
like,
Two different
the
pages.
instructor
Two
to show up,
different pages. So I should
the
have
class,
three
and like
each.
you're still in
Yeah,
your
I mean, it's
folder,
three, so
and
can't-
You
yeah,
can even
so
check-
like,
so
you
yeah,
have to cancel classes, and like, your kid was there.
I don't know how I feel right now.
You
Like,
said
it's
you're
not
like,
just
you
like
like,
shot.
said you did a 2-year-old.
Right now.
I don't know, 2-year-olds like, yeah, and then you like,
Thank you.
everything's everywhere, and then totally pee his pants, and like, check out the pants, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of that this morning.
I'm doing deals with PhDs, matches and tasks,
And
and
then she's like, you have class, right? And I was like, I have class in 20 minutes. She's like, "Okay, girl, I can finish up your class, like, not a big deal." I was like,
that's why I'm going to publish.
yeah, I wasn't about to say either, and like, try to form it out.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I got it.
I think I got just a bit, but.
Actually kind of a pretty cool problem.
Yeah, I know you're like, oh, these are pretty decent, and I'm like,
You're like,
Okay. So, okay, so the exam's a week from today. I don't think we're not doing anything new. We haven't done anything new in a while, I think. That's fine. So there will be no new concepts for the exam. So today I want to go through the solution. So I handed out the homework that's due for Monday and the solution. Don't look at the solution yet. I just handed it out so later on we can take a look at it. So what I want to do now, I don't know if you'll find this helpful. I'm hoping you do, is that, I think in learning Python, understanding how the individual statements work, how an if statement works or a while statement works, is pretty straightforward. The hard part is, how do you have a problem that's a page long, and how do you translate that into Python statements? And so I'm hoping you find it useful to see, like I did the last time, like I can do now, it's the thought process that I have when I go through it, to see how I attack these problems is a way that you might adopt. Not everybody attacks problems the same way. And so, but I think if you see the way some people do it, you might adopt some of those strategies. So I'm hoping there's some benefit to that. So why don't you not look at the solution? Why don't we just follow along in terms of my thought, what I was thinking of as I solve this. How many people got this working? Oh, have fun doing that? Show it to your friends?
took a while.
It took a while. Okay. Yeah, it was a fair amount of code. So that's actually, okay, so hopefully this doesn't fall on deaf ears. Maybe I should scream or do a handstand. So the fact that you got it working is great. I still think it's of value to watch my solution. Not that mine is necessarily better, but it just sort of gives you ideas about, oh, I never thought about doing it that way. And that, for the next problem, of course it doesn't, I'm not giving you a blackjack problem for the next one, but the more you see the way people think about solving these things, the more you can incorporate that into the way you attack these problems. So of course, I like breaking this down into functions where I have a main function. Okay. And so, and I've also posted this, because you're going to download this, I've posted this on Blackboard. You can't get it yet. At 11:30 I turned it over, because I want you to watch this as I go through it. So my idea here is the following. So, okay, fine. As Bono said, sort of the main function is sort of an outline. I think that's a good analogy. So I'm sort of at the top level trying to solve sort of the top level things that I need to accomplish as I look at this problem. And as I look at the problem, it says to me, okay, we start out the game, we deal 2 player cards to the player, we deal 2 cards to the dealer, we ask the player if they want more cards, we get those cards, we then see if the house needs more cards, that meaning if they're under 17. So if they're under 17, we deal the house more cards, or the dealer more cards, and then we figure out who won. To me, that's the outline of the game, right? So to me, that says, fine, why don't I, at this top level, write the program that does these different steps, not putting in all the details. So I said, okay, what we need to do is we need to deal 2 cards to the player, but I'm going to need to know what that total is, because this whole game revolves around how much the total of the cards that each of the player in the house gets. So okay, why don't I write a function that I'll call start player? And of course the names of these are arbitrary. So I'm going to write a function called start player, and the start player is going to deal 2 cards to the player, tell them what those cards are, and then return to me, so this function start player is going to return to me what that total is. So the little jump that to me is I would do all the time, that would take a little practice for you, is to say, yeah, I want to do that, and I know I need to get the total value of those cards, so why don't I have start player, that function start player, return what that total is. If I get that far, it would seem to me you'd get the next part, say, okay, the next thing is to deal the cards to the dealer, and so I'm going to write a function called start dealer. And it's going to deal 2 cards, announce what those cards are, and return the value, and return as a value, and put it to the and put it in the variable dealer. Great. As I verbalized, the next thing is, now we're going to ask the player if they want more cards. They can get more cards. So I'm going to write a function that's going to do that, but I'm going to need to return what the total is, right? So it would seem like I'm going to have to say player is equal to, and this is going to be a different function than start player, because the start player is just dealing 2 cards. It's not asking them if they're going to need more cards, so I'm going to have to write a different function from start player to get those cards. And so I'm going to say get player. So this is going to get, and I could have given a different name. The difference here now is, though, get player, I need get player to return to me what the total is for the player. So I simply can't just write get player in and of itself without passing it information. Get player needs to know what the player's total is at that point in time. So therefore, I know that get player is going to prompt them for more cards, but I also need to tell get player this is how much the player has at that point in time. So that says to me I've got to pass a value to get player, which is the player's current total. So I'm going to send to get player the player's current total, which I had previously gotten from start player. And whatever value it returns, I'm going to put back in player. This looks a little odd, because I got player here as an argument to get player, and that's what I'm putting in as the value, the variable where I'm returning the value. But it really, right, it seems to make sense. It's got to know where we're starting, and then however many cards it gets, it's going to add to it, and then it's going to return back that value. Now, I might not have gotten that from the get-go. I might have, as I wrote get player, realized I have to return, I need to get that value. In this particular case, I did understand that I was going to have to do that at the top level. But of course, as you saw what I did last week, you're always going back and sort of massaging things between the main function and the subordinate functions. That's fine. This is just sort of a starting point. You should have no illusions that you write the main thing from start to finish. You never go back and change it. That never happens. But it is a very good starting point. So now the player's got all the cards they want. Now the next thing is we need to see if the dealer needs to get cards. How do we know if the dealer needs to get cards? Well, if the dealer has less than or equal to 17, they need to get more cards. So I'm going to test to see if the dealer's total is less than 17, less than or equal to 17. And if it is, then the dealer's got to get more cards. And so, again, this sort of mimics what I did with the player. I said get player cards here. This is different. We just type in cards. There's actually a better name. And of course, in the same vein that I had to send to the get player cards function the players total up to date, I needed to set to the get dealer cards the dealer's total, and I'm going to put that back into dealer. So now I've done all 4 parts of the playing of the hand, and so now at this point, player has however much the player has, dealer has how much the dealer has, and now I've got to figure out who won and announce that. And again, I'm going to write that as a function. I don't need to return anything because this is just going to say the dealer won or the player won, so all I need to do, though, is to pass to it the totals to date. And so I'm going to write a function called outcome or figure out outcome. I just use the word very function outcome. And it's going to figure out who won getting past the player's total and the dealer's total. So now I've got this outline of the program. Okay? Seems to me this is probably the cleanest, more straightforward sort of sets of things that need to be done. There are really only 5 things that need to be done, and I've created 5 functions to do that. So now that I've done that, let's start writing the code for each of these functions. So start player is going to get, that has no value passed to it. And so start player, okay, don't type this. This isn't my ultimate solution. I first thought, you know what? Okay, so this is pretty simple. I'm going to play a card. Was I supposed to say something in the beginning? Yeah, so I'm supposed to have just an opening text here that says print dealing first 2 cards to fine, print that out. And so my first idea, okay, fine, let's deal a card. And of course we said the way you deal a card is you've got to generate a random number between 1 and 10. So I'm going to do rand int 1, 10. And in order to use the random function, I need to import the module random. Now you only need to have, the import statement should always be at the top of the program. You only have to specify it once. So I deal a card, and I then say print so I deal a card, fine, and then I print out the value of the card, and then I said to myself, okay, fine, I got the first card. I'm going to deal the second card, so I'll have another variable card too, and I'll just print that out. And then I'm going to say, okay, so I can create a variable called players equal to card 1 plus card 2. And then I can print out and then return player. So this would deal 2 cards, pretty straightforward, deal 2 cards, print out the value of the cards, compute the total. I didn't have to create another variable, but I felt like it. I print out the total of what the player has in their hand, and then I just return that value. And maybe I want to print a blank line. I could have printed a blank line here by inserting a \n, but I like also just have a print statement with nothing in it, which will print a blank line. And that would then deal 2 cards, compute the total, and return that total back to the main program. Okay? Panos?
Instead of using the random function twice, is it okay if I made another definition for like a deal, where I use like a for statement and then like in a range, and then I kind of created a way where I just had to just return that deal function, and then I didn't have to repeat the random thing twice.
So very good. So you reduce the amount of code that instead of having this, perhaps you had a for, 0 to 1, range or 0 to 1. Terrific. That's great. So that sort of generalized it. That's good. My generalization is the following. I said, I'm going to have to deal cards for the player. I'm going to have to deal cards for the dealer. I'm going to have to deal cards when the player plays. I'm going to have to deal cards when the house plays. It seems to me that this dealing the card is something that's going to be repeated multiple times. And to me, immediately, if I've got to do it multiple times, you know what I might want to do? Maybe I want to create a function that instead of having to deal the card and say print out card dealt, why don't I instead define a function called deal card? And the deal card function would deal a card, print out the value of the card, and return the value of the card. This is different from what you did, Panos, but it's sort of the same idea.
I incorporated like a counter too.
So the number of times?
Yeah.
So you pass the number of times you wanted it, either 1 or 2?
You just print 2 and 2.
So that's a good idea. That's beyond what I did. But my idea here was that, fine, now that I have a function that deals a card, I don't have to do these 2 steps. So what I could do instead is why don't I now instead just create a variable player, initialize it to 0. Why don't I then say player is equal to player plus deal card. So now I have a function that deals a card and returns the result. I initialize this variable player to 0 because I want to use it on the. I didn't actually have to do it this way, but I want to deal 2 cards. And now, instead of having to deal the card and print it out and deal the card and print it out, instead I simply call the function deal card, which did the same thing. It did what I did before, generate a random number between 1 and 10, printed out what the value is, and returned it. So now I can call this deal card function. It's going to deal a card. It's going to give me a value. I'm going to add it to the current value of player, which is 0. And now player represents what the value is of the first card. And I call it a second time. Panos had it in the for statement. It's probably better. This is clear also, that I'm going to deal a second card. Okay, this is a second call to deal card. It's going to get a second card. I'm going to take the value that it returned, add it to what player is, and put it back into player. Then print out the player's total, print out a blank line, and return player.
So I have the same thing. It just said like deal card parenthesis 2. So it just kind of eliminated one line.
Right. So you either pass the number of cards. Right. Very good. Yeah. So and then in other places you passed 1.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have to have this twice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just eliminated one line.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's a different way. The good idea is that you put it in a function and you generalize it. That's the good takeaway. But does everybody see then sort of the wisdom of now just having this? When I thought about, I'm going to be dealing cards all over the place, why not put it in a function? Now I can call it twice. And as I think ahead, when I'm going to do the dealer dealing the start dealer function, I know I'm going to have to deal cards. So again, I can reuse that deal card function. Okay? So now I've got the start player. Now I have to do start dealer. As I think about start dealer, the reality is that the start dealer and the start player are really the same. The only difference is that I'm going to have the word dealer here instead of player. So reality is I can simply take this function and copy and paste it, and then say instead of start player, it could be start dealer. And I could have used player as the variable. I decided to create another variable. There was no reason I had to. So really, the start dealer was the same as the start player, except I'm using the word dealer instead of player. And note again that I'm reusing the deal card function again. I didn't have to reinvent it. So the takeaway here is that if you see a function, if there's some operation that you're going to be repeating over and over again, why don't you create a function that does those particular steps? I will admit that the steps weren't particularly hard. It was simply dealing the card and printing it out. But suppose there was other stuff that needed to be done. By creating a function that did it, I don't have to remember all the details each time I want. I simply call it by saying deal card and the function name, and it returns a value in this particular case, and I get all the functionality of it without having to worry about how it works. So now the next thing is I want to now get from the player, I want to now offer them that they can now get cards. So I'm going to now define get player cards. In this particular case, this gets a value. I'm going to say it gets player. That's the total that the player has so far. And now this is going to prompt the user to say, do you want another card? And if they do, we're going to deal them another card. Otherwise, we're just going to punt. So first thing is we're going to do is we're going to ask them, do they want another card? So I'm going to have an input statement that says, do you want another card? And I just have a print statement afterwards, so there's a space after this in terms of what displays on the screen. And then I'm going to want to test to see if this is a yes, in which case I'm going to deal another card. Because they could have typed in the Y and the no in upper and lower case, I'm going to set the answer to, what did I do? I did lower, so I know that it's always going to be lower case. And now I'm going to have I'm going to have a while loop where I'm going to test to see if the value that they type in is Y. Why a while loop? Because they can take any amount of cards that they want. So I can't have an if statement there, because if I had an if statement there, I don't know how many cards they want. That would only handle one card. The while statement instead is going to allow me to have code that's going to ask them for an unlimited number of cards. So, okay, I prompt the user if they want another card, change it to lower, test to see if it's a yes. And now if it's a yes, well, what do I want to do? Well, I want to deal another card. Well, the dealing another card is simple because all I have to do is copy the code from the start player, and I'm going to call the deal card function, which is going to deal a card and add it to the player's total, which was passed in to get players. And now I'm going to want to print the value of the instruction said now at this point you're going to print the value of the player's hand, which is simply the value of the variable player. I'm going to print a blank line. And now I'm going to ask, again, do you want another card? Print a blank line. So really all I'm doing is copying this code here. So then this while loop is going to loop around for as long as they type in a Y saying they want another card. And again, the code I had pretty much written before. Deal a card, add it to the player's total, print it out, print a blank line, ask if they want another card, blank line. Change the answer to lowercase so that when I do the test, I'm always testing it to lowercase. And now I can just return player. And note that if they didn't want another card, if they came in and said, no, I don't want another card, they would have answered N. So I'm going to take N and turn it into lowercase. Answer is now N. Is N equal, answer equal to yes? No, it's not equal to yes or a Y. Therefore, we're not going to now give them other cards, and it's simply going to return back the value that was passed to it. So that works fine. If they don't want another card, this doesn't do anything. It just passes back their current total. Any question on that? Yeah, Nick.
Trouble doing this. So I instead put it in the main.
You put the...
Part of it.
Yes.
And then I had a second thing that said and the player total it wasn't equal to 21. So that it would keep running if the person...
If the busted,
and
yeah.
it was not 21.
There wasn't anything in the programs, in the homework that said you had to do that. That's better, of course. So I'm sort of interested in the why you couldn't get it running in the function. Obviously, the code was almost exactly the same that you had in main that you had in the function, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had two variables called dealer tote and player tote. So it had like the running total of the hands for each the player ended.
In the do while, you didn't. The do while would only be for either the player or the total or the house or the dealer. It wouldn't be for, right? You'd have one for the player and one for the dealer.
Right. But I had those both in the main instead of when you were calling it in the different functions.
But okay, but your initial reaction was you wanted it in a function, you couldn't get it to work, and therefore you said, "Forget it. I'm hungry. I just want to get this thing to work, so I'm putting it into main."
Right.
I guess. Okay, so I'm most interested that you get it running. So you're doing that is okay. I guess I would have preferred to see what was it. You got some sort of syntax error when you put it in, or it didn't give you the desired result?
I mean, I was just struggling with having the total in like multiple functions, like before.
Yeah, okay.
So I was trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, it can get confusing, and it makes it easier just put it all in one. Okay. Do you get this?
Yes, I did have the first part though, where it had where it asked like if you wanted another card, and then it would check if it was a Y or an N, and then it would return the Y into the main where if the while statement.
Oh, yeah, but you did this, yeah. I mean, it doesn't make fun to break it up that way. It makes more sense. If you did that, you might as well put it all in the main as opposed to breaking it. Okay. So the next thing would be to get dealer cards. Any other question on this? So here we're going to deal more cards to the dealer. And we know that they need more cards because they were below less than or equal to 17. We did that test in the main routine. So since we knew they now need more cards, now we're going to have a while statement where before in the while statement we were seeing if the answer was yes to see if more cards should be dealt. Now our rule is we're going to deal more cards as long as the house's, the dealer's total is less than or equal to 17. And if it is, okay, right, then all we're going to do is dealer is equal to dealer plus deal card, deal a card, print out the value, the dealer's current total, print another blank line, price. And then once we're all done, once the dealer has more than 17, simply return the dealer's, return the value for the dealer. So now we've dealt the dealer, and that this was really very much, the dealer was simpler because there's no interaction, but it mimicked what we did with the player. Now we're almost done. There's only one more function to write, outcome. So we get the player's total and the dealer's total. Now we just have to figure out who won. So I think I had here in terms of the what it should look like, outcome, and we're going to print out what the current totals are. And now we got a test to see. Now we have to do the test to see who won. And so my test was that if the player busts, if they have greater than 21, then the player loses and the dealer wins. Now, if that's not true, then we have to do another test. So I'll use elif. Now I want to test to see if the dealer went above 21. And if the dealer went above 21, then the player won. And if neither of them went above 21, okay, hopefully I'm not going to go over LF, hopefully everybody is good with this. If neither the dealer bust or the player does, now we want to test to see if the player's total is greater than or equal to the dealer's total. And I think I said in the problem that if it's tied, the player wins. So if the player has more than the dealer, then the player wins. Otherwise, then this is the end of the story. So, okay, any questions on this? So again, I obviously typed this after having written it. I wouldn't have come up with a solution simply reading the problem, sitting down at the terminal and printing this out, typing this in. That never happens. But I certainly, in terms of a strategy to attack this problem, I certainly would have come up with an outline of this. And I think, Nick, even to your point about, I'm sort of heartened by the fact that your idea was to break this up into a function and ultimately you couldn't get the function to work and you went back in the main. At the very least, you were partitioning the problem into different chunks, and whether you offloaded the chunk in a function or you had that chunk as a section in main, it would have been better in a function, but it's certainly a very good procedure to think about it in chunks and putting it in main. So I think your thought process was right, and you probably had a time constraint. I would have fiddled with this thing, and I think I did. I wrote this problem a while ago, and when I did the solution, the card dealt thing I didn't come up with originally. The deal card function didn't come up with originally, but as I was writing it, I'm dealing cards so frequently, doing the same steps, that immediately I said, fine, I'm just going to write a function to do that and offload that, not having to worry about it, and knowing now that I simply can say deal card, and it's going to deal a card, display what the card was dealt, and then I can use that in the calculation both for the player and for the dealer. Notice I have the same function being called both for the player and the dealer. So I hope this is, doing the homework assignment is the most helpful part in understanding how to do this. Having done it and perhaps struggled with it for a while and coming up with a solution, hopefully you can see where hopefully at least some of these ideas are a cleaner solution. And again, as you get problems, thinking about first attacking it by sort of making an outline of things to do is really the way to go. You're never going to be able to solve this by simply putting in all the details from the get-go. It's a bad way to think about things.
Can you go back to get player card? Because when I'm running it, I type in yes. It's like giving me an error message. Otherwise, I can show
Does it point to a line, Katie?
it says line, it's the player equals player plus deal card.
So,
It's saying that the named player is not defined.
okay, so say what does it say it again?
Or, it says, the local variable player is referenced before assignment.
So do you have player up here being passed in?
So I put it in, and now it says that it's missing one required positional argument.
Did you pass it over here? So in main, did you say get player card? Did you have it here?
Does dealer also need player to card?
No, dealer just gets its own cards. I'm sure you typed. We're going to download this right now, so and it has printed out. But you should get the concept of what we're trying to do in terms of passing values and returning them. So, okay, so everybody, let's pay attention here on this. So, let's take a look at. Okay, the first thing is it there. Why don't you go to Blackboard. And just so you have something that works. So In the content section, under lecture, the last lecture, right, under 19, there's a Python program. It's the solution. Why don't you download that and open it up in the Python editor? And that's what I typed in. I put in some additional comments there, but it's really this code. Okay, everybody got that? Yep, Taylor?
Do you mind explaining one more time why you chose if there is less than or equal to 17 opposed to another number?
Sure. So, Taylor, in the problem and the way the game is played is the dealer must take cards as long as they have less than or equal to 17. Once they reach 17, they can't take any more cards. So it's just the rule. So in the problem, Taylor, in the one, if you have it still there, in the 5th paragraph, it says, after the player has taken all cards she or he wants, the computer should start taking cards. The computer will stop taking cards when its hand has exceeded 17. So 17, somewhat of an arbitrary number. That's the way the casinos play the game. Okay, so everybody got the code. Why don't you open up the code? And let's go and let's just go to the section where you can see the definition of the function start player and start dealer, which I have on the screen now. Now, as you look at start player and start dealer, okay, it seems to me if you look at the statements in them, what do you surmise? So start player, we say dealing first 2 cards to player, the variable player equals 0, player equal player plus deal card. Do that again, print out what the value is, print out a blank line, return player. And if I look at deal card, I say, okay, the first statement is to print the dealing first 2 cards to the dealer, dealer's equal to 0, dealer plus deal card, blah, blah, blah. Nick?
Using the same variable name?
Well, the code is almost the same, right? Aren't I really doing the same thing? The only difference is in one case I'm doing it to player, in the other case I'm doing it to dealer. Now, I'm not saying you would have done this writing the program, but if that were the case, and I'm trying to make this as efficient as I can, what could I do to the code to instead, to shorten the amount of code I have here? Could I have, in fact, created one function that would have done this both for the player and the dealer? So just watch, don't type this in. So if instead I didn't have a start player and a start dealer, I had a function called start, and I passed it a value who, where who would either evaluate to dealer or player, the string dealer or player. And now I'm going to say dealing first 2 cards to player. Instead of having hard-coded in here player, instead I would have had who so that would be the same thing. If who is equal to dealer or player, it's going to give me the same thing. So if I, in fact, had this function called who, where I passed in the value who, and that would either evaluate to dealer or player, I could have gotten rid of the start dealer, And now, when I call now, instead of calling start player and start dealer, I call this function called start. Now, I wouldn't have had start player, I would have had start, and what would I have had in here? What would I have had as a parameter? Let's take a look at who. Who simply is, right, who is the string that I'm printing out here? Sorry? No, this is the starting of it. I'm just dealing two cards, first to the dealer, first to the player, and first to the dealer. So instead of having two different functions, one for the start player and one for the start dealer, I'm saying, let's just have a start function and pass to it a string. The first time it's going to be Don't type this in, but I just wanted to show you this. So I call start and I pass the string player. So start starts, who is now player. This now prints out dealing first two cards to player, ... Sets, now this is where it might throw you. Hey, say, wait a minute, but you're dealing cards, this is to the player, but this is just a variable. It goes away. It doesn't make any difference. This could have been X. Right? I put variables there. I put a variable player there to make it seem more reasonable when it was start player. But this is just some variable. I said x equal to 0. I take x. I add 1. I add whatever card was dealt. I then add the second card that was dealt. I now print out value of who, where who first is player's hand, and now x is equal to the sum of the first two cards dealt. I print a blank line and I return x. And note now that when I call it the second time with dealer, now who is going to be equal to dealer, and now this is going to evaluate to dealing first two cards to dealer. Deal two cards. Remember the variable x, or before player, was just a variable that exists when start is running. It goes away after start goes away. It has nothing to do with the variable dealer and player in the main routine. They're two completely separate entities. And so I could have shortened my code. I'm not saying this is the greatest solution, but it would seem to me, since the code effectively did the same thing, why not just have one routine and pass to it this value who, because that's the only thing that really was different here was the word that got printed out to say who you were dealing the cards to. And instead, just incorporate that within a string, and I can get rid of a function. So I've combined, if you look at the code that I handed out, all I did is I combined into one function the two functions start player and start dealer. And what I did is I generalized that to having a start function, and instead of having the words player in there, forget about the variable player. It's just a variable there. It could have been any variable name that I chose. That instead I just had one function, and now I'm passing a value to it. I just want to show you the power of a function that I can, because I can pass values to it, if something is really doing almost the same thing, I can, sort of what Panos did there when he passed either one or two cards to the deal cut function, he used the same general logic that I'm using here in start and just tailored it based upon the parameter that got passed, which is either going to evaluate to dealer or player. Okay, don't change. Well, if you did change your code, you can change it if you use that, or just re-download what you had before. If you didn't change it, that's fine, because now I want to do some problems here based upon that code. So note here, from my slide here, note that I was actually able to, I didn't need both a start player and a start dealer function. All I needed was one function called start, because they basically did the same thing, and so I can combine that into one function. The next question is, could I have combined into one function the get player cards and the get dealer cards function into one? And if you look at those functions, okay, so here is get player cards, and here, let's see if I can get this all on the screen at the same time. So here's get player cards, and here's get dealer cards. Could I have combined those two functions together into one? Because you might say, well, they're sort of doing the same thing. They're dealing additional cards. And the answer is, in this particular case, not, because the player is getting additional cards based upon whether they answered yes or no. The dealer is getting additional cards based upon the fact is if they're below 17. So these, while they're getting additional cards, yes, they're different. They're very much different because in one case, I'm prompting the user for a value, and the other case, so my do while here is whether the person said yes or typed in a Y for the player, and for the dealer, the reason they got another card is that they were below 17. So for the get player cards and the get dealer cards, in fact, I really can't combine that together into one because they're fundamentally different. And so therefore, I have to have two different functions for those two different things I need to do in the program. Okay, so why don't we then do some more programming in class? And so why don't you take hopefully you understood the solution I had, the one that you downloaded, again, reinstitute that. And why don't you now change that program, hopefully you understand it, so that now, as in real life, if the player gets over 21, the game stops, the game is over. So in the player can't get over 21 on the dealing of the first two cards. They can only go over 21 if they get more than two cards. And so in that routine, in the get player cards routine, what I want you to do is I want you to stop. I don't want the player to take more cards once they go over 21. So if they take a card, they got a 7, they got a 10, they ask for another card, they get a 7 again, so now they're at 24. At that point, the game should be over. You shouldn't prompt them for another value if they want to get another card. No, they can't. The game's over. You should get out of the get player cards, and then the game should be over. There's no reason to continue. So why don't you change my code to now incorporate this logic that the game ends once the player goes over 21, regardless of what the dealer at that point hasn't taken cards, so the dealer couldn't be over 21. The game is over once the player gets over 21. Change the code to support that. Okay, anybody get it to work? So, if the player, clearly, the player is going to go over 21 in the get player cards function. So what do we have to? So we have to do something here. So what do we have to do here to stop them from getting more cards once they've gone over 21? We don't want to ask them any longer. When they first come in, they can't be over 21 because you can't go over 21 with the first two cards. So they could get a third card. So let's suppose they get a third card, and now that card puts them over 21. We print that out. We ask them if they want another card. I guess they're going to say yes here, but we're not going to deal them another card. So how can we stop them? How can we stop at this point from getting another card? It would seem like all we need to do is, in addition, if they could say yes, but their total has to be less than or equal to 21. So if their total is less than or equal to 21, they can get another card, otherwise they can't. And so the while loop will fall out, and then they've just gotten one card that put them over 21. And then, so fine, so now that's fine, they don't get to dealt another card, so that this is where we got called. So now player is good, the value variable player is going to be some number, but we don't want to deal more cards to the dealer if in fact the player went over 21. So this test here where we're only testing to see if the dealer is under 17, we also want to test to make sure that the player is less than or equal to 21. And if the player is over 21, then the dealer won't get another card because the player has busted already and the game's over. So having laid out the program this way, it was pretty simple to enforce that the player didn't get another card when they went over 21. Katie?
So in Maine, you know how you say if dealer is less than 17, is that necessary when we already do that in get dealer card?
Okay. So we're going to do this together. So Katie's point, okay, this is actually a good observation. She's saying, well, why are you testing to see if the deal is under 17 here in Maine? And also, and the funny part, Katie, is when I looked at this, I hadn't looked at this like in 6 months, and I had the same conclusion you did. So why am I looking to see in the while loop if it's under 17 and also in Maine? So what am I doing here in Maine? Okay, here, what is this doing? This is testing to see if on the first two cards they're under 17. So Katie's right. With one exception. Okay, Katie, so what do we have to, so here, let's suppose what Katie's advocating, forget about this is under 21. So what she said before is, she said, can I get rid of this statement? And simply, after the dealer gets dealt two cards, call the get dealer cards function, because regardless of testing for the 17, because when I come in here, I'm testing to see if they're under 17 anyway. That's what her point was. Do we agree she's right? Because let's suppose the first two cards that the player get was a 10 and an 8. So dealer would be 18. I call it get player cards. And I come in here and it prints this out, but then it says, is 18 less than or equal to 17? It's not. Therefore, I don't get into this do while loop, and I simply return dealer, which is 18. Does everybody get it? You see her objection was, this is very good. She said, why do I have to call that function? Why do I have to have the if statement? The function takes care of it. And I would agree that it does with one exception, Katie. Okay, so let's go through this. So it's a minor thing, but so if there were 18, if dealer were 18 and I call the get dealer cards function, what's the first thing that happens? It's right there, right this? But if they have 18, we're really not going to deal that card. So the problem would be I would have to now not print that statement. I guess I could delay that. I can't, the problem is if I put it in the do while loop, it's going to print multiple times each time I go through the loop. So that's sort of annoying. I could have had here, go ahead, Chris.
Well, so that kind of doesn't line up with what the homework actually said. Like when you gave examples of homework,
Yeah.
you wanted us to print, every time the dealer, like you wanted to say what he got, like the value of his card when it was printed, or like when he got it.
But I did do that for the first two cards in the get dealer, in the start dealer, right? I said start dealer.
Yeah, but then you also, well, maybe I'm remembering wrong, but when, like in the actual, like, after the player takes his turn, then it's the dealer's turn, every time the dealer took a card, I did it in my code, that I said that what he got.
What individual card he got.
Yeah, what individual card he got, and then I said, like, if he's under 17, the dealer is taking a card right now, this is his card, all right, he's still under 17.
But it did, because it's, so here in the start dealer, this is, the deal card prints out the value of the card, the deal card prints out, it doesn't say it's the dealer's card, it just says the value of the card, and then it says the dealer's total.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the way I had it before in get dealer, so it says he's taking more cards, and then it's deal cards printing out the value of that individual card, and this is printing out the total. So it's printing out both the value of the card and the running total for both the dealer and the player.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know why you would have it like that. The dealer is necessarily taking more cards, unless.
Oh, they were under 17. That was the whole point. As long as they're
Before that, you check for that. I just think.
okay. So let's go back to this, Katie. So you were right. The only thing I would have to do here is if I didn't want this statement, which would be wrong, is that I have to test here to make sure that the dealer is under 17. And if I did that, then I wouldn't have to have a separate function. So you're right. It's a good observation. I didn't have to do it twice. I had this if statement in the main in order not to call dealer and not to print that function. So your instinct was right, saying, looks like he's doing that test twice. Does he need it? I did need it to avoid having to have this printing of the dealer taking more cards. Let me put this back. Okay, guys, so let's just do one last thing before we adjourn.
Could you just explain one more time how you would get it stopped if the player exceeded over 21?
So in get player cards, I added, in addition to testing to see if they said yes, I'm testing to make sure that they're under 21. It is a problem here because it did actually prompt them for another card after they, so it said, suppose they had a 10 and a 7 and they get a 10, so now they have 27. It says value of the player's card is 27. It would prompt them here. I actually should, in all fairness, I probably should have here yet another test if player less than or equal to 21. I probably should have done that to be completely, and in this case it wouldn't even ask them, so it would have been redundant. I have to have the test here so I don't prompt them, and I have the test here to break out the while loop. So you get here, Panos said that here, once they're over 21, they're not going to be prompted anymore. And then over here, I put in the test to see if they're under 21, so that the dealer wouldn't get any more cards, which is really what happens. If the player busts, the game's over. So all I added was to the while in the if statement to test to see if the player is under 21. Yeah.
This is kind of, but is there a way
Run the program, like how to make a function, an easy way to write a function that runs the program until you get a certain like result of the random generation. Like, so you want to test what happens if the player and dealer tie. But that means you just have to keep running it until you get that result. Is there a way to, do you know what I'm saying?
So you want to run this,
Just like big variables, just like stuff.
Yeah, it's true. I just didn't, yeah.
so one way to do that, that's a good comment, was what I could have done is I could have changed the get deal card.
Yeah,
And so instead of calling the random number generator,
you could, yeah.
I'd just say return 10.
Yeah, I just didn't know, because I just didn't want to, like, because if the code works, you know what I mean, that's not like,
Well, but that would be a good test, because then what you could have done is instead of having, you could have commented this line out and said card equal 4. So every time a card was dealt, they get 4. Right? And so the game, well, that wouldn't be great. 10 would be better, because then the dealer would have 20 and the player would have 20, the game would be over. And then once you made sure that the tie function worked, then what you would do is go back, take this line out, reinstate this.
I'm adverse to changing code when it works. Like, once I get it working.
I don't want to change it for fear that it'll never work again.
Yeah.
So my goal here, Chris, is to have you to have enough confidence that you know that you're going to be able to put it back to get it running again. Nick?
The way I found, like, to get around this was putting an if statement underneath the while for the card. That said, if the player total was exactly 21, it would just say, like, it would have the outcome, then the player wins. Else it would just have the new card. Like,
So where did you put this? Which
so
function?
Where you had the answer, like, well, answer equals
Yes.
y.
Yeah.
I had an if statement underneath the value of the player's hand.
Oh, I get it. So you got rid of this. You didn't have that in the wild?
I had that.
But you had here if?
No, underneath the value, underneath the print statement for the value.
This statement, if player less than or equal to 21?
Right. I had it, if it was exactly 21, that it would print the outcome and then the player won.
But what if it was greater than 21?
Then it had the else statement that would have it pick another card.
In the player to pick another? Oh, I'm not sure I follow that.
If it's,
Oh, because they asked for another card and then you get to get another card? I'm not sure why you're looking exactly for 21 as opposed to...
and the code there.
But what if it was... Okay, I guess I'd have to see it. Okay, so the one last thing is, this is sort of small, we did this last time. What if we wanted to play a number of games? What if instead of just here, we're just playing one game, what if we wanted to play a number of games? So again, what we probably would do is we would just have a function called get games, which would return the number of games the person wants to play. And then all this code, I put some comments in there to make it clear, all this code would then simply be part of a for loop. And that would play then that number of games. And then I would go and write the get games function. Okay, so any other questions? So that's it for today. There's another homework due on Monday that I handed out. Everybody got a copy of that? Similar to this, another game playing program, a little more complicated. The only way you get better at this, hopefully you guys feel like you're getting better at it. The only way you get better at it is to do more of it, and hopefully it's taking you a shorter period of time and you're able to assimilate when I talk about this more easily. So, okay, so that's it. I'll see you on Monday.